It started with a siren, that high-pitched mechanical wail that always made your chest tighten no matter how many times you'd heard it before, a sound that had become as routine as the morning bell at Reed Ridge Elementary, especially during spring, tornado season in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where drills were just part of life, where you ducked under desks or lined up in the hallway with your head tucked and your arms over your neck. And on April 17, 1996, it was supposed to be just another one of those drills, just another loud, annoying interruption to spelling tests and milk cartons and colored pencils. But that day something didn't go as planned, because 11 kids entered the locker wing in the old gym building and never came out. No one saw them leave, no one heard them scream, they were just gone, like the floor had opened up and swallowed them whole, and despite weeks of searches, interviews, thermal drones, scent dogs, nothing ever surfaced, not a footprint, not a thread, not a cry. And eventually the town did what small towns do, it buried the story in silence, coded it in time, let the memory harden into myth and ache and whispers, especially because the school itself shut down the very next year, boarded up, forgotten, left to rot behind a chain-link fence and thorns, a broken shell filled with rusted chairs and mildew-stained desks, a place you drove past but didn't talk about, a place where the wind seemed to echo more sharply, where even the birds wouldn't nest near the roof until one morning in 2025, 29 years later, when the school district announced redevelopment of the old property into a municipal rec center, and the construction crew showed up with bulldozers and tools, laughing and cursing and slapping their hard hats like this was just another teardown. Just another day on the job, until a worker named Jules Redding went inside the West Wing to assess the locker area and ran out pale and shaking, saying he'd heard voices through the concrete, high-pitched, echoing, impossible voices, like kids yelling, screaming, whispering, saying help us, we're still here, and no one believed him at first, not until the next worker went in and heard the same thing, and then another. And then the foreman decided to shut down the site temporarily and call in the city inspector, who reported nothing structural but left abruptly halfway through the walkthrough and wouldn't answer his phone afterward. And that's when the mayor's office, desperate to avoid panic, issued a quiet request for archival support to look into the building's history, which is how Claire Halbert got involved, a 34-year-old assistant archivist from Little Rock with a habit of chasing stories the state wanted to forget. The kind of woman who still used a typewriter for drafts and carried an old microfilm reader in the trunk of her car, and when the email about Reed Ridge came through, flagged delicate, she packed her files, her handheld recorder, and drove down that same night, arriving just before sunset as the last of the construction crew peeled out in silence, their faces gray and hollow, refusing to make eye contact, and when she asked the foreman what they'd heard, he just said, "You wouldn't believe it." Then handed her a folded sheet of yellow paper they'd found, taped inside a locker, dated April 1996, and signed with the initials KH, which matched one of the missing kids, a girl named Kayla Horton, age 9, quiet, known for drawing strange things in the margins of her math tests, and the note was simple, scrawled in pencil and nearly unreadable through water stains. "We thought it was just a drill, but then the floor buzzed and everything went soft and we weren't in school anymore, but we were still here just under it. Someone opened a door under the gym, and it keeps going and going, it won't let us out, it loops." And that was enough for Claire to step through the doors herself, recorder on, flashlight ready, into the crumbling dark of the gymnasium, the dust heavy, the air damp. Old banners for state championships still dangling from the rafters, shredded and gray, and when she reached the locker hallway she paused, heart thudding, because the lights flickered and something distant brushed the edge of her hearing, a faint murmur, like many voices talking at once just beneath her feet, and then it stopped, and she knelt by the floor drain and noticed it wasn't just a drain, the grate was welded, the bolts old but not factory, and there were scratches around the rim, tiny ones, like fingernails trying to pry it open, and beside it, etched into the tile by something sharp, were words she couldn't explain, still under, not asleep, just looped, the same phrasing from Kayla's note, and she backed out slowly, documenting everything, taking photos, pressing record, whispering a log update with her name, date, time, location, and a note that something was very wrong with the foundation of this place, something that had never been acknowledged, something that might still be active. And that night in the motel she ran the school's blueprints again, noticed that the original gymnasium had been renovated in 1995 to include a sub-basement never used, then sealed up after a brief electrical fault was cited in the county permits, and her notes grew deeper, her maps wider, and somewhere in the static of her late-night audio files, she caught a whisper that hadn't been there before, faint but real, a child's voice saying, "We're still in the walls." And that was the moment Claire realized the case wasn't cold, it was buried. And something inside the building wasn't just memory, it was presence, and it was waiting to be found again. If you want to hear what happens next and uncover the truth behind the Reed Ridge disappearance, don't forget to like, comment your theories, and subscribe. Claire returned to the school the next morning before sunrise. The fog hung low over the broken field like a breath held too long, and the building loomed in silence. The boarded windows looking more like closed eyes now. She parked a little farther down the road, not wanting her car noticed by any passing patrols or neighbors, though truthfully, the neighbors around here didn't glance at this place anymore. It had become a void, something eyes passed over without registering. Inside, her footsteps echoed through the front corridor, past the graffiti-splattered lockers and into the hall where the gym met the old science wing. She stopped at the scratched locker again, this time lifting the door fully, finding a rusted thermos and a melted eraser inside. Nothing significant until she noticed the number scratched faintly into the back wall. 11 vertical lines, not just a count, but a tally, as if someone had marked time or people, or both. Her recorder buzzed slightly in her pocket and she lifted it, not for sound but warmth. It had turned warm again, just like it did last night when the static voice whispered the name Jessa. A name she hadn't said aloud in years. One of the 11, one of the forgotten. Jessa May Calhoun, age 9, wore purple glasses and carried a strawberry-scented sticker book wherever she went. Claire remembered her because she used to sit in front of her in art class, always drawing dark tunnels with stars above them. At the time it seemed like fantasy, but now she wasn't so sure. Down the hall, the intercom crackled again, just once, then cut off, but it was enough to send her heart racing. Because no power ran to this building, no generator, no grid, and yet the intercom worked. At least when it wanted to. She walked deeper toward the rear corridor, where the janitor's office used to be, and pushed the swollen door open. It stuck against warped tiles but gave with a sharp creak inside. The room was as she remembered. Half-rotted mop handles in the corner, a filing cabinet with drawers long jammed shut, and a broken clock stuck at 2:37. But there was something new now, a pile of small shoes, all mismatched, stacked like offerings beside a rusted floor grate. Claire knelt, not daring to touch them but counted. 11 shoes, not pairs, just 11, each one different in size, style, and wear. A message, she thought, or worse, a memory. Suddenly the grate clicked, like something shifted beneath it, and Claire scrambled backward as dust burst upward through the slats. She pointed her flashlight down but saw nothing, just darkness and the faint glint of metal far below. A shaft maybe, or a duct too narrow for her. But not for a child. That was the chilling realization. She stood, her breath catching in her throat, and backed out of the room, marking the door with chalk like she had in her early training days. But even as she turned away, the intercom clicked again, and this time it spoke, not clearly, not loudly, but enough. We waited. A child's voice, hoarse, almost like it came from deep underground. Claire froze, every part of her telling her to run, but she stayed. She had to. Someone or something remembered, and it wanted to be heard. At the motel that night, she played the recording back, and the voice was still there. Not a hallucination, not her own mind, it said more this time. 11 down, 2 to find. We're still below. Claire's blood ran cold because it didn't sound like a child afraid. It sounded like one who had adapted, who had been there for so long they forgot how to fear. The next day she returned again, bringing a thermal scanner and an old blueprint she bribed from a city clerk. The school had once been part of a civil defense plan, built with reinforced tunnels and compartments beneath the main structure in case of nuclear war, forgotten over time, left to rot under concrete and rain. But the blueprints showed a hatch beneath the cafeteria, sealed off in '97 after a gas leak that was never confirmed by anyone officially. She made her way to the cafeteria through debris and fallen tiles. The air heavier here, like it remembered screaming. Under a rotted cafeteria table she found it, the seam of a trapdoor. Covered in peeling linoleum, rusted bolts held it shut but one was already snapped, bent inward like someone had tried to open it from below. Her hands shook as she pried the rest free with a tire iron. The smell that emerged was stale, sour, like wet earth and something long hidden. She descended slowly, step by step, into the darkness, flashlight cutting beams into the thick air at the bottom. Concrete tunnels branched out in 3 directions, marked only by fading spray paint. S1, S2, S3. Claire turned toward S3. Something about the number felt wrong. She could almost hear it echoing back at her even before she took the step. Down the narrow tunnel, the air grew colder, but she kept going, passing pipes wrapped in tattered insulation and child-sized handprints on the walls in red chalk. Fresh, untouched by time. She whispered their names as she moved. Jessa, Marlo, Andre, Lainey, Tamir, Ellie, Jonah, Serena, Milo, Harriet, and Thomas. And the tunnel answered, a whisper not with voice but with vibration, a hum that seemed to say yes or maybe almost. At the end she reached a sealed iron door, handle rusted but scraped clean by small fingers. She touched it and a shock of static ran through her arm. The door groaned but opened, and inside was a room that didn't belong to any school, walls painted with stars and spirals. A child's voice on repeat through an old intercom speaker. We're still below, don't forget. Claire dropped her flashlight, heart hammering, and backed away as her recorder blinked red again and the door behind her slammed shut. Claire moved through the tunnel, its air thick with mold and memory. Her flashlight beam skimming over rusted pipes and graffiti she couldn't decipher. the word shelter painted in white over and over again on the cracked walls, as if someone had tried to remember where they were or begged to be found, her steps echoing like distant thunder, and behind her, silence hung like fog. Then, a whisper brushed past her shoulder, not in her ear but in her skin, a child's breathless voice saying, "Stay with us." And when she turned there was nothing, only the distant flick of a failing light deeper down, so she pressed on, the walls narrowing slightly until she emerged into what looked like an old subbasement, lined with peeling metal lockers and a desk that had fused with rot, and on the far wall a mural, hand-painted by small hands, showing 11 figures standing around a spiral, their eyes closed, lines drawn from their heads to a circle in the ceiling, and underneath in red the phrase, "The siren wasn't for the tornado." Claire stepped closer and noticed old Polaroids tacked around the edges, faded images of kids wearing yellow safety vests, their names scrawled in marker, Jenna, Mario, Eliza, Devin, Kaylee, Tomas, Sandra, Bryce, Malik, Olivia, and one without a name, only a question mark, the 11th child. Face partly obscured by motion blur, and beside the photos, a tiny speaker embedded in the wall. Crackled again, more distinct this time, playing a loop of a child saying softly, "We hid like they told us," then laughter, too fast, too layered, too wrong, and then a woman's voice whispering, "Sequence completed." Claire reached for her phone but her signal was gone, replaced by an unfamiliar network ID that read, "redlock_11_active." And her screen dimmed, flashed, then went black, so she pocketed it and opened her recorder, pressed record, and narrated everything she saw, her voice shaking but firm. She documented the tunnel, the mural, the looped voices, and the rusted vent that looked recently disturbed. Then she crawled toward the vent, removed the loose grate, and peered in. It led to another tunnel, tighter, barely shoulder-wide, and from it came the scent of old dust, rotted wood, and something else, candle wax and lemon, familiar and unsettling, and the faintest sound of chalk on stone. Dragging slowly, she climbed in, inch by inch, dragging her bag behind, heart pounding like footsteps right behind her. Then the tunnel turned sharply and she slid into a chamber with a domed ceiling painted in black, stars drawn in chalk above her, a crude constellation that didn't match the sky but looked oddly intentional, and in the center, a pile of yellow vests. 11 of them, carefully folded, atop a desk with a single sheet of lined paper resting on top, and on it, a message in a child's blocky handwriting. "If you read this, don't call the names," followed by 11 names written anyway, each now crossed out except one, the one with a question mark, left untouched, and below it, smeared in what looked like old ink or dried blood, was another line. "We only echo what's remembered." Claire backed away but the intercom above buzzed to life again, this time louder, broadcasting through every hallway. Above them, a distorted recording of a school bell, then screaming, not overlapping but in sequence, like one scream passed to another, 11 total, each lasting exactly 3 seconds, then silence, then the bell again. Claire scrambled out of the chamber and raced back through the crawlspace, her recorder still running, but as she reached the first junction again she froze. Light was coming from the left path now, not hers. And it wasn't flashlight white, it was amber, flickering like flame. And there were shadows with it, small figures, moving in twos, then ones, then a larger one bringing up the rear. She ducked into a locker alcove and waited, heart hammering so loudly she feared they'd hear it, but the shadows passed without noticing, and she recorded the sounds, soft murmurs, footsteps too rhythmic, and a child whispering, "Don't let her leave," followed by another voice that sounded identical, repeating it with slight variation, like a loop learning as it played. Once they vanished. Claire emerged and climbed the tunnel stairs she'd barely noticed earlier, leading to a locked door with a keypad, her fingers trembling as she tried random digits, until on instinct she entered the year, 1996. The keypad beeped twice, then clicked. The door opened into the east wing of the school building, sealed since the fire in 97, dust thick, floor collapsed in sections, and across from her, a wall smeared in black streaks, like something oily had seeped out from inside, and written faintly over it was a message burned in, "Echo, echo, echo." She took a photo, stumbled backward into the light of her flashlight again, then turned as she heard someone call her name. Not a whisper, not a hallucination, but a clear voice, "Claire," and it came from behind the counselor's office door, long boarded up, now cracked open just slightly. She raised her light, stepped forward slowly, knowing every part of her brain was telling her to leave, to run, to never come back, but still she placed her hand on the knob and pushed. Claire didn't sleep that night, not after what she'd seen in the tunnel and definitely not after what she'd heard in the walls, because the moment she tried to close her eyes, the locker room ceiling groaned again and a single, elongated scream echoed down through the pipes as if someone was being pulled through a drain, and the more she listened, the more it felt like the scream was looping, repeating, building into something that wasn't entirely human anymore. So she grabbed her bag, the voice recorder, the photos, the child's note, and left the motel without turning off the lights. She drove through the dawn toward the county records office because she needed to know who had built the original school structure and if there had been any tunnels marked on the blueprints, but the file clerk just stared at her when she asked and said quietly, "Those plans were sealed in '97, same day the janitor vanished." Then turned away like she'd said too much already, but Claire wasn't done. She bribed a part-time assistant named Margot with gas money and access to the county microfilm, and together they unrolled dusty blueprints that hadn't been touched in decades, and there it was, beneath the gymnasium and locker wing, a circular utility layout labeled Emergency Youth Containment Test Area, which was never reported to the public or parents, a facility that didn't legally exist. And Margot backed away slowly saying, "This isn't right, this isn't school architecture." But Claire photographed everything and left, hands shaking, because now it wasn't just a mystery, it was a cover-up, and back in her car she finally opened the envelope tucked inside the voice recorder's battery compartment, the one she hadn't dared to touch yet, and inside were 11 names, 11 full names with birthdays, allergies, and something else, something worse, a stamp at the bottom that read, Siren Cohort B. Status, reassessment pending, and just as she read that line, her car radio turned on by itself again, the frequency scrambling, then clearing just long enough for a child's voice to whisper, "We're still down here," before static drowned it out and the screen flashed red once, then went dead again, and Claire screamed into the silence, slammed the dashboard, and drove straight back to the school. This time breaking the back lock and slipping in through the supply door, flashlight drawn, boots crunching on old floor grit, but when she passed through the gym and toward the locker room, something had changed. The hall smelled like wet copper, the lights flickered in reverse rhythm like a stuttering heartbeat, and inside the lockers, one door had swung open by itself and inside was a single shoe, small white, covered in dried red mud, with a name marker that read Elliot J., a name from the list in the envelope, and Claire felt the air around her thin like a vacuum, the walls pressing in slightly, the ceiling dripping that same black ink substance that now formed words on the tile. "If you count us, you call us." And that's when it hit her. Reading their names, holding their things, marking their memories might be unintentionally summoning whatever presence lingered behind the floorboards, and when she turned around, her phone buzzed. A photo had appeared in her camera roll she hadn't taken, a shot from inside the tunnel, time-stamped 2 hours earlier, showing her own silhouette, standing next to 11 blurred childlike figures, none of whom had faces, just swirling smudges where eyes and mouth should be, and Claire ran, but the more she moved, the more the hall bent into angles that shouldn't exist, the locker stretched, the floor sloped downward, and behind her came the clicking of shoes that sounded small and bare and unsteady, and then a voice called out again, a girl's this time, from somewhere inside the walls. "You heard us, now find us." And that's when the locker slammed shut behind her, cutting off the only exit, forcing her to face the cracked floor tile beneath her feet that now glowed faintly, as if inviting her to peel it back. Claire didn't sleep the night she found the blueprint. She sat in her motel bathroom with the door locked, the blueprint spread out over the sink and the floor, tracing her finger again and again over a faded line labeled Lower Containment East Sector, and the note scribbled beside it in red ink, "Siren Project, do not unseal." The night outside thundered, matching the pounding in her chest, and the static-laced audio she'd pulled from the radio kept looping a warped recording. 11 voices overlapping, saying, "It's still here, it never left, don't go under, don't remember," and with each loop her mind frayed just a little more, until 3:14 a.m., when the bathroom light flickered, then went out entirely, and the mirror began to fog despite no steam in the room, and in the center of that fog, a sentence formed from inside the glass, "Room B6. It's open now." Claire didn't scream, she just grabbed her flashlight, her crowbar, the USB drive taped to her leg, and walked into the night, barefoot, dazed, focused like prey that knows the predator is close, but not where. She drove back to South Ridge High, parked by the same staff entrance she'd once entered as a student, and found it already open, the lock she'd broken 2 nights ago removed entirely now. The hallway smelled of wet paint and old memories, and every step echoed against the linoleum like footsteps answering her own. She reached the locker hallway, where a black smear now stretched from the far corner to the door marked mechanical, and inside, the vent was wide open, no longer bolted shut, the screws placed neatly in a row like someone had been expecting her. She climbed in, bruising her knee against the duct wall, crawling downward for what felt like forever, until she dropped into a square chamber made of red brick and rusted pipework, and there, embedded in the floor beneath a metal grate, were 11 child-sized shoes placed in a perfect circle, each one labeled with a name tag, and Claire felt herself sway, because all 11 names matched the list she'd found, the Siren Cohort, and the center of the circle was burned black, not with fire but something acidic, unnatural, and from above, the intercom crackled to life again and spoke clearly in a child's voice, "Claire, it's your turn," and all the lights shut off at once. In the pitch dark she reached for her phone, but the screen refused to light up. instead showing only static snow and flickers of distorted photos, she screamed and turned on her flashlight, and for a second saw the wall in front of her covered in drawings, done in childlike crayon, each one showing a version of her alone, standing at the center of the circle, surrounded by faceless children, and every one of them had the words "Don't leave us again" scrawled across the top. Her breath caught, because she had no memory of ever being here before, but her body did. Her muscles trembled like they were remembering trauma she'd buried deep, and the worst part, her name was written in the same childish handwriting beside the others, Claire, Testy, and next to it, a question mark and the word, recovered. She backed out of the chamber fast, crawling upward through the vent with tears running down her face, scraped and gasping, until she tumbled out into the hallway again, the lockers slamming open around her on their own as if something inside them had just been released. And then she saw them, reflections of children moving in the mirrored trophy case, but when she turned, the hallway was empty. She ran, found herself in the auditorium again, where the old stage curtains were slowly rising with no one on stage. And there beneath the spotlight stood a desk, and on that desk, a file folder with her name on it, and inside, a document labeled Project Siren, Behavioral Triggers and Long-Term Dormancy, with her photo attached, age 9, same eyes, same scar on her eyebrow, and notes that she had shown resistance to memory alignment, and was released under false records, and suddenly it all clicked. The reason she had no memories before age 10, the sense that something was missing, the obsession with the missing kids. It wasn't investigative, it was personal. She had been one of them, somehow extracted, somehow rewritten, and the remaining 11 were calling her back, not as a rescuer, but as one of their own, and she fell to her knees, hands over her ears as the intercom screamed to life one last time, every speaker pouring out static and a single voice yelling, "Don't wake up, Claire, it loops, it loops, it loops." Until everything fell silent again, except for a low rhythmic tapping from
under the floorboard of the stage. Like knuckle knocking, 11 times, then silence.
Claire stood frozen beneath the auditorium's single spotlight, her hands trembling as they hovered over the worn folder on the desk, her childhood photo paperclipped to the top, her younger self staring back with the same brown eyes and faint scar on the brow she always assumed came from a fall she couldn't remember. And now, as if some glass barrier cracked silently in her head, fragments of memory pushed through, soft voices, flashes of light, the cold metal of the intercom speaker humming at the back of her skull, the sound of her own breathing too loud, too steady, as she sat down on the wooden chair, opened the file, and saw rows of names she had never heard aloud since that day in 1996. Dylan Yates, Kira Boone, Tyler Funn, Madeline Cross, J.L. Monroe, Sky Parker, and 5 more she couldn't read right away because something was wrong with the paper itself, the ink warped and dancing, bleeding slightly as if the names were still resisting being remembered, and then the intercom clicked on again, the voice no longer static warped but calm, measured, almost fatherly, saying, "Claire, you've come far, but you are late to your assignment," and that voice. She knew it now, not from childhood but from dreams. From flashes she mistook for nightmares, and suddenly the light above her dimmed and the walls behind the stage creaked open like sliding partitions, revealing not backstage curtains but a metallic hallway glowing faintly with greenish-blue light, built with the same sterile panels she saw in the underground tunnels, and she stood slowly, the folder clenched in her hand, walked forward toward the opening, her breath catching in her throat as she stepped into the corridor, the walls around her narrowing the further she went, until it gave way to a rounded room where 11 reclined chairs were arranged in a circle, and all of them were empty except for one, where a boy sat facing away, maybe 10 or 11 years old, his hair overgrown, hospital gown too big on him, and when she said, "Sky," he turned, and the moment their eyes met, her knees gave out because it was like looking at a version of a class photo brought to life. His face unchanged, untouched by age, but eyes ancient, tired knowing, and he said nothing, only tilted his head toward the corner where a screen flickered to life, showing footage of a school hallway in 1996, kids walking calmly, lockers rattling as a drill alarm buzzed overhead, then suddenly everything flashed red and the camera cut out, static, then came back showing the same hallway in 2025, untouched, dust-covered, and a girl walking through it, Claire, pausing before the janitor closet that led to the original stairwell, and then Sky finally spoke, quiet. "We weren't taken, Claire. We were left," and that word slammed into her chest because it aligned with the note she saw in the basement mural, with a crayon scrawl that said, "We hid so good you forgot us." And now, looking closer, the chairs weren't empty, not really. They were full of faint impressions, like heat shadows, of 11 children who had been here, who were maybe still here in some other state, stuck between drills and echoes, and then the walls pulsed. Not visually but sonically, like the air itself was thick with memories, and Sky reached into his gown and pulled out a single silver whistle, handed it to Claire, and said, "They only used this once," and then the bell never rang again. So she took it, though it felt wrong in her hand, metal too cold, and before she could ask more, He pointed behind her, and she turned to see the other 10 chairs slowly illuminating as if lit by old fluorescent coils buried inside the walls. And for a heartbeat, she saw the others, all of them, sitting perfectly. Still, eyes closed, breathing, not dead, not alive, just paused, and then, her own name echoed over the intercom, her full name, as if read from a roll call, Claire Isabel Marin, and the hallway behind her began to seal shut, metal plates sliding down with loud clanks, forcing her to choose stay or run, and she whispered to the room, "I'm sorry," before bolting toward the only lit path, past flickering lights, until she emerged again through a grate under the old gym, the same one Sky was first spotted beneath by the drone months ago, and as she climbed out, covered in rust and dirt and guilt, the intercom crackled one last time in the empty gym above and said, "Experiment loop compromised. Initiate reset," and every locker in the hallway slammed open and shut at once, like a warning or a goodbye, and Claire didn't stop running until she reached her car parked behind the overgrown faculty lot. And even then she didn't pause. She drove straight to the police station, dropped the folder, the drive, the blueprints on the front desk, and when the young officer asked her name, she simply said, "You'll find it on page 3, then disappeared again into the night. And a week later, a new report emerged. Independent investigators hired by the state discovered a sealed door behind the girls' locker room labeled Level Echo Access, and beneath it, 11 school chairs arranged in a perfect circle around a melted speaker. And written in chalk around the edge of the circle were the words, "They practiced disappearing until they forgot how to come back." And even now, in the hours before morning announcements, staff report strange feedback bursts in the intercom system, like distant screaming beneath a river, and the janitor's logbook continues to be updated despite no janitor being officially hired since 2012, and the final entry reads, "Subject S11 resisted the recall. Claire initiated disruption. Records contaminated," and the last page is signed in red ink, "Sky Parker, age 10, missing since 1996, last seen exiting the school through a tunnel that didn't exist on any blueprint." And some say if you listen closely during the next tornado drill, you'll hear the intercom crackle and whisper 11 names one last time.